Good morning and welcome to the Peorian. I'm your host, Paul Gordon. Now, I don't know about you, but I love to read. When I have time, that is. I especially enjoy good fiction. You too? If so, you are probably like me in that when you finish reading a good book or short story, you think, I would love to write something and get it published. You probably have read something and thought to yourself, if that person can get published, why not me? I'm just as good or better. Well, there is one annual publication that at least gives anybody a shot at getting an original story published. It's called Downstate Story, a locally produced magazine, Peoria's only literary magazine, in fact, and it features 10 short stories written by Illinois and Midwestern writers, with original art illustrating some of the written pieces. The magazine is published each fall, and Volume 20 hit the newsstands just before the end of 2011. Its stories, quote, reflect diversity of authors and include romance, horror, fantasy, and mainstream fiction, end of quote. My guest this week is Elaine Hopkins, the publisher of Downstate Story, and she will tell us more about this unique publication, how to get in it, how to find it, and tell us who some of the authors are after these messages.
Ready to hear what our local elected officials have to say on the issues in their own words? Check out the Good Government Forum on thepeorian.com. That's where elected officials in Illinois post their thoughts and ideas. From the City Council to the U.S. Senate, you can find out where they stand on the big important topics as well as the small important topics too. Only at thepeorian.com, where we're focused on the past, present, and future of Peoria. Visit thepeorian.com and click on the Community Forum today.
Welcome back to the Peorian. My guest today is Elaine Hopkins, publisher of Downstate Story, Peoria's only literary magazine featuring 10 stories written by Illinois and Midwestern authors. Elaine, thank you for joining us. Yes. Tell us about Downstate Story. How did it get started and by whom?
Well, I founded it with some friends. We, back in 1992, were aware of some good short stories being written by people in the area, and they really had no outlet for publication. And if they did happen to get their story published in a literary magazine somewhere, then their friends would probably never hear of it or never read it. And so we thought, let's do a literary magazine. So we did it. Now, I had a background in English. I taught English for 5 years at the college level, and I have a master's degree plus, almost a PhD, in English and the teaching of English. So I had a background in the literature, and I had some friends who were good with technology, and we just put it all together and did it.
So that was the impetus? It wasn't anything other than
No, that was it. We thought it'd be fun and an interesting project, and it has been very interesting, and a way to give local writers a publishing outlet and let their friends read their publications and promote literature and reading and writing.
What kind of stories were you looking for at first?
Always, we've looked for literary mainstream fiction.
Okay.
And we wanted a variety of stories so that anybody who picks this up finds something of interest for them. I mean, obviously, fiction is a huge spectrum of things, but mainstream literary fiction, that's what I like, and that's, I think, the best idea for a literary magazine.
Not any particular, I mean...
Nothing for children, no. There may be some mysteries, but they're more mainstream fiction type mysteries. No pornography, nothing offensive. This has been used in college classrooms at ICC and elsewhere, and we wanted, you know, something that would not offend people, although some of the mainstream fiction can get a little rough, but no pornography or anything.
What do you mean by mainstream fiction?
Mainstream fiction would be the kind of fiction you read in the New Yorker or Harper's or the Atlantic.
Okay.
And some of the stories we have published, I think, have been just as good or better than what you see there every month in those magazines, big time magazines.
Do you ever have horror stories?
Occasionally, but not a whole issue full of them. We might have one, we might have a science fiction story. So we had a variety of things, but they're you know, not the whole magazine full of that. So we can't say this is a science fiction magazine or a mystery magazine. It's a variety of things.
Do you retain the rights to edit?
Yes, but I usually let the authors look at it, unless it's something not very serious. Yes.
I guess what I'm getting at, if you had an author turn in something that you felt was a little risque for your magazine, you would tell them first, look, this might go over the line. Will you
I've
fix it?
I've never done that. When I mean edit, I mean paragraph it so it's easier to read.
Okay.
Maybe insert a comma or spell something correctly, that kind of thing.
How many entries do you get a year?
Oh, we get a couple of hundred, a lot.
No kidding.
Yeah, a lot.
How long does it take you to pare it down to the 10?
Well, I have a group of friends who read the stories,
Okay.
and they each take a stack and read through them. And from the ones they like, I look at those and we decide on 10. And again, we look for a variety of stories so that we don't have all love stories, all horror stories.
Do you like stories about, do you look for fictional stories that are based in Central Illinois necessarily, or?
Not necessarily, although some are. I mean, I like good writing. I mean, a good short story is a work of art. It's just like a painting or a piece of music, and it has some of the same standards. I look at fiction as being kind of like jazz music. You never quite know what's coming next in a good piece of jazz, and yet it's so right, and it tells the truth of the melody, or in the case of fiction, the truth of everyday life, the human heart, the real truth. So I look for stories that are well written, no matter what the subject.
Does it take more of a knack?
Oh yeah.
To boil all that you want in a story into a short story?
I think it's a talent. I think writing at this level is a talent. It's not journalism. Journalism just tells you what's happened. Mm-hmm. But a good piece of fiction has a kind of a metaphorical cast and reveals things you haven't really thought of before. Like I say, it's like a piece of jazz music.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Did you ever dream that it would go on 20 years?
No. Well, I never thought about that. I just sort of lived from day to day, year to year.
Well,
yeah. So it's really been fun. I've met some really interesting people, and there's some great stories in these magazines. We have a website, a pioneer website that was developed back in the 90s, and we've kept the same look, and all the writers are listed on the website over the years.
When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the authors in this magazine, as well as from past volumes, including some names you may recognize. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Peorian. I'm with Elaine Hopkins, publisher of Downstate Story. And before we go any further, Elaine, we would be remiss if we didn't tell people how they can get a copy of the 2011 edition of Downstate Story. It's $10, correct?
That's right.
How go on from there?
It's sold at the Lakeview Museum shop.
Oh, okay.
And it's sold at the Little Bookshop in Peoria Heights. I know you like a book,
I know you like a book.
which is a lovely place. It's sold at Maury's in Pekin.
Okay.
And you can also order it online through the website.
What is the website again?
Do you want the whole address? It's a pioneer website, www.wiu.edu/users/mfgeh/DSS.
Let me ask you this. If
There's
people
an
Google
easier
Downstate
way.
Story, will they
Yes,
will they get
they
it?
will find it. Just Google Downstate
Story.
Story. Yeah.
Tell us about some of the authors in this issue, some of the authors as well as some of the stories.
Oh, okay. I always do a little rundown at the beginning about the stories. And I say, this issue is particularly weird and dark.
Oh.
There's a hanging based on Illinois history, very interesting story. A sports bar fight, a murder at a wedding, death in an alley, and a hunter who becomes the hunted.
Oh.
And then there's a very odd comic fantasy story about a cartoon figure who comes to life. And there's a diversity of victims in this story. There's a gay minister who comes out of the closet, a handicapped woman in a wheelchair, a working class woman, and an urban black man whose youthful lives are at dead ends. These are the 99%. They're angry. They're left out. They're full of resentment. Well, some of the stories have hope as well.
That's good. Do you don't necessarily look for any particular type of story
No.
again? Okay.
No.
Tell
I
us-
look for good writing.
Well, tell us a little
strong
bit
writing.
how people can contribute.
Okay. They can go to the website and look at the writer's guidelines and send in a story. Now, I would say follow the guidelines. Please. There's a 2,000 word limit.
Okay.
Some people have sent me novels. Don't do that. We can't publish your novel, but we'd like a 2,000 word story from it, perhaps, that you select and write. You follow the rules of common sense to submit a short story to any publication. You put your name on every page. You send a self-addressed stamped envelope. You type it. I've had handwritten stories sent to me. Oh no, please. No games, no poetry, no novels. Follow the instructions, and take a chance with an editor and a publication. And this goes for any publications. Now, we publish our magazine to mainstream fiction standards. We pay the writers. We pay each writer $50. I wish we could pay more, but at least $50 is something, you know.
They can say they've been paid.
That's right. And we buy only the first rights
Okay.
to publish the story. So that means a writer can take the story in here and sell it to television or the movies or whatever. It's their property to sell. So I think that's the ethical way to do it. I've thought about moving this to the web, online, but there's no way to pay the writers unless I develop some kind of a pay-per-click system, which involves higher technology. And I don't know how I would do that. I'd have to find somebody to do it and pay them to set it up. It's a thought, though, because more and more people are moving to devices, screens. However, this has the advantage of being able to stick it in a pocket or in a purse. You can take it on an airplane when they say, shut off your devices. You still got something to read.
We're going to take a break now for messages from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to meet one of the authors from this year's magazines. But first, here is the Peorian's own Kevin Kizer to talk about what's going on in the literary and culinary world.
Hey, congratulations for staying tuned for my segment. I won't disappoint. Okay, there's a decent chance I will disappoint, but full steam ahead. Okay, there are a lot of books being turned into films in 2012. The reason for adaptations are obvious. There is a built-in audience of those who've already read the book and those who will never read the book but want to act like they have. So here's a list of some of the biggest adaptations coming out in 2012. First off, we have On the Road, which we've already talked about, so let's move on. Second on our list is Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, for reals. This is based on the novel by Seth Graham Smith in which the 16th president becomes a vampire hunter after his mother is killed by a supernatural power. Sounds about as historically accurate as Bill O'Reilly's recent Lincoln biopic. Third, Anna Karenina. This is from one of the big boys, Tolstoy, and it's cast accordingly with Keira Knightley as Anna and Jude Law as Alexei. The story revolves around Anna, who abandons her loveless marriage to Alexei for Count Vorovsky. Fourth, a little more mainstream choice, Breaking Dawn Part 2. Since Stephenie Meyer's book is so big, it was divided into two parts for filming. The first movie came out in November 2011, and the finale will be released in November of 2012. Great way to serve a large novel and milk the pocketbooks of Meyer fans twice over. Fifth, The Hunger Games. This one should be a blockbuster with a massive built-in audience. The story is pretty well known. After the collapse of the U.S. in the near future, the country is divided into 12 districts. Each year, the new government mandates 2 young tributes from each district to fight in a gladiator-style competition known as, wait for it, The Hunger Games. Get it? Okay, number 6 on the list, Life of Pi by Jan Martel. This is truly a modern classic, telling the story of Pi and his family who moved from India to Canada. However, on the voyage there, Pi ends up shipwrecked with a lifeboat full of hungry zoo animals. Now that's a gladiator-style competition, my friends. Eat your heart out, The Hunger Games. Okay, so there you have it. Film adaptations to keep an eye out for in 2012. And as always, you are welcome.
Welcome back. We're talking about the newest edition of Downstate Story, the literary magazine that features Illinois and Midwestern writers. And joining me now is Pepper Bauer of Mapleton, one of the authors not only in this one, but in others as earlier editions as well. Welcome to the Peorian, Pepper.
Thank you.
How many volumes have you been published?
Been in 12.
12 out of the 20?
Yes, 12 out of the 20. I think there was a break in the middle, so 13 years ago I started sending things. I think I missed 1 year.
Any particular reason that you just enjoyed writing and you want?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I write. I used to write for the Limestone Independent News in Bartonville, a monthly fiction thing for them.
Oh, okay.
Now they've, like many publications, got a little short on money, so now I just do it once in a while, a special feature for them. And I wrote for Legal Records.
Oh, okay.
So I've just always enjoyed
Talk about a difference in that.
Yeah.
Have you been published elsewhere other than?
Just the newspapers and Downstate Story and just various, maybe a church publication.
Have you ever submitted to a professional publication?
I have. And I was rejected a couple times. So.
What has it meant to you as a writer to have a vehicle such as this?
It means a couple things. Number one, it's of course fantastic to be published. The first time, I got a story in here, I was, ecstatic. It is a really good feeling, but also it's motivation.
Okay.
I know when the deadline is, and maybe I'll have a story in my head all year, and then, oh boy, here comes June 30th, which is the deadline for getting stuff in for this. And so I start really putting it down on words and editing it and making it solid. So it's a motivation. Probably if you didn't have that kind of motivation, well, if I didn't have that kind of motivation, I probably wouldn't sit down and write some of the stories in my head. But, it's a good reason to do it. And so, I have it in the back of my head all the time that I need to get it done. So it's good motivation. It's just fun to have it in there. It's fun to read what other people write. It's just a really neat thing.
Where do your ideas come from?
I don't know. Sometimes I just hear something. Most of what I write, a lot of what I write, is fiction around social issues.
Such as?
Such as, oh, gee, I've had corporate stuff in there several times. I have, I'm the one with the minister coming out of the closet, which was an issue in the denomination I attend in the last couple of years.
Okay.
I had stuff about people on strike, which was the first story I had in here, and that was during the Caterpillar strike. So it was just things I hear, read, although most of my stories are around social issues, but a couple have been science fiction.
Oh, okay.
So either way.
Now I understand that part of your property is like a wildlife sanctuary.
It is.
Correct? Mm-hmm. Do you ever base it on that? Anything about that?
I've had at least one story. I can't remember all 12, but I've had at least one story that was about. In fact, it was about around my house where they were building a golf course.
Oh.
Yeah, so it did have to do with that issue.
Would you recommend that others who want to write short stories and be published to submit to this?
Yeah, yes, I would. Just do it. I know a lot of people are afraid to, or they don't, they're afraid they can't do it, but just sit down and write something, and then I read somewhere that everybody does a bad first draft, and then you just keep looking at it and looking at it and looking at it, and then just send it in. I mean, the worst is you don't get published.
Do you ever have a hard time keeping it to 2,000 words?
Yes.
How many drafts will you go through before you send in the final one?
It depends. Some of them I've gone through very many. But my last few stories have been shorter, but there have been times where I've had to really peel it down to get to 2,000 words. Writing for the newspaper in Bartonville, the little newspaper, you learn to write shorter things because they can't publish very large things, so I've learned to keep it short. But yeah, sometimes it takes some editing. But when I originally set in something, to Downstate Story, I found it in Writer's Digest. She has a little blurb in Writer's Digest every year saying it's one of the contests or things that you can do, one of the books that you can submit to. So that's when I first did it. So, but and the first time I got to admit, I was kind of scared. And she didn't take the first one I sent her. So.
Oh. Is that the only
But
time
you keep trying it.
Is that the only time you've been rejected?
For Downstate Story, no, one other time. That was the break in the middle. Oh. But for the most part, yeah.
Is this publication, a publication like this, if you can't get into Downstate Story, I'm sure there's others.
There's many others, yeah.
Okay. Is it a good way to find out if you're any good?
I think it is. I think it's a good way to at least, practice and maybe see what they're looking for, maybe be able to hone your style a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And measure yourself against other writers.
And measure yourself against other writers, yeah.
Has it given you thoughts about wanting to expand your horizons, such as try to write a full novel?
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody, I think, has a novel in their head or somewhere. But, and maybe that'll happen someday. Right now, short stories are about all I can do with all the other stuff I do. So that's about all that I have time for. But sure, I think everybody has a novel inside.
Okay. Pepper, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching our program today. And remember, you can see it in its entirety on our website, thepeorian.com. And join us next week on WHOI for another episode. Have a good week.
Música